On a lonely stretch of highway deep in West Africa, a luxury white SUV was pulled over by a routine traffic stop. Inside sat a man known across radio stations and church banners, Pastor Enoch, a beloved preacher draped in spotless white. But when Officer Bako opened the trunk, what he found silenced the road, the forest, and every whisper of faith that had ever followed the pastor's name. Hidden beneath folded linen were two freshly severed human heads. No crowd, no congregation, just one calm man in a white suit and a police officer staring into something far more evil than he expected. This isn't just a crime story. It's a descent into the chilling space between power and pretense. Stick with us as each chapter slowly pulls back the curtain. If you're drawn to true African stories with mystery, tension, and raw humanity, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and drop your thoughts in the comments. The road stretched long and quiet, framed by wild grass and red dust that rose gently with each passing car. It was just after midday, the sun sitting stubbornly in the sky, casting shadows of trees that swayed lazily in the wind. Officer Bako stood by the roadside checkpoint, sweat lining his brow, uniform clinging to his back. He had waved through motorcycles, pickup trucks, and old sedans all morning. Nothing out of the ordinary. But when he saw the white SUV approach from a distance, he straightened. Not because of fear or suspicion, but instinct. The vehicle moved with unnatural calm, tires barely disturbing the gravel beneath it. The glass was tinted too dark, and the body shimmered like it had been detailed just hours ago. He raised his hand. The SUV slowed and came to a gentle stop. No screech, no sudden motion, just obedience. The driver's window slid down, revealing a face every radio listener and roadside billboard had seen before. Pastor Enoch, the miracle shepherd, the man whose prayers were said to raise businesses from death and bodies from sickness. His skin was smooth, his beard neatly trimmed, and his eyes carried a warmth that didn't quite reach the bone. He smiled, calm and unbothered. "Good afternoon, officer," he said, his voice smooth like melted butter. "May the Lord bless you." Bako nodded politely, but something didn't sit right. Maybe it was the faint scent that drifted from the open window. Sharp, metallic. Not the kind of smell you'd expect from a pastor's air-conditioned cabin. Maybe it was the fact that the man hadn't blinked once since he rolled down the window. Regardless, Bako followed protocol. "May I see your license and papers, sir?" Pastor Enoch handed them over without protest. All were valid, nothing out of place. But Bako's gaze slid past the pristine interior and toward the rear of the SUV. Something tugged at him, something invisible yet firm. He cleared his throat and stepped back. "Please open the trunk," he said. The pastor paused, just for a second, but it was long enough to say more than any word could. His smile remained, but the edges of it tightened, like someone holding back a truth that wanted to scream. Slowly, he pushed the button, and the trunk unlocked with a soft click. Bako walked to the back, unaware that in the next few moments, the highway, the pastor, and even his own soul would feel forever changed. The moment Officer Bako lifted the trunk door, the air changed. It wasn't dramatic, no gust of wind, no blinding light. Just a stillness, as if the very space around him took a breath and forgot to exhale. The scent hit him first, faint but unmistakable. Not rotting, not floral, but something in between. A wet, heavy odor that clung to the nostrils. His eyes scanned the trunk. Two large bundles wrapped tightly in off-white linen sat nestled between a glossy suitcase and a red duffel bag. They weren't shaped like anything specific at first glance, just rounded, uneven mounds. But one had a dark patch where the fabric was soaked through, the stain crusted at the edges. "Is there something inside these packages I should be aware of?" Bako asked, his voice controlled but firm. He hadn't reached for his weapon yet. Not because he wasn't alarmed, but because he wasn't sure what exactly he was looking at. Pastor Enoch stepped out of the car slowly, his white suit blinding under the sun. He didn't raise his hands or protest. He simply walked to the back of the vehicle and stood beside the officer. His smile had faded now, replaced by a serenity that felt too still, too calculated. It's sacred, the pastor said, nodding toward the bundles. Not something the eyes should see carelessly. Bako's eyes narrowed. That scent was growing stronger, wrapping around him like fingers tightening on his throat. He reached out, lifted a corner of the linen, and froze. What looked back at him was not a package. It was a face. Human, eyes wide open, lips parted as if caught in the middle of a scream. Blood still lined the hairline. And beside it, another shape, same size, same weight, unmistakably another head. Bako didn't speak. His throat closed in. The taste of bile rose behind his tongue. Pastor Enoch didn't run, didn't flinch. Just stood there, his eyes fixed on the forest ahead, as if none of it belonged to him, as if he were only a passenger in his own sin. And in that moment, under the blinding sun and the quiet song of insects in the grass, Officer Bako understood. This was no man of God. This was something else, something colder, something older. Officer Bako stumbled a step back, the linen still dangling from his fingers. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. His training clashed with something primal in his gut. Every part of him screamed to step away, to leave the thing behind and pretend it had never entered his sight. But he couldn't. He'd seen the faces. Two of them, young, possibly no older than 20. One had a scar beneath his eye, as if he had once been in a fight and survived. Not this time. Their eyes were still open, glassy, frozen in whatever terror met them in their final moments. He glanced at Pastor Enoch, expecting panic, denial, or even rage. But the man looked peaceful, like someone who had just left a quiet prayer meeting. His hands were folded behind his back, his chin slightly lifted toward the sky, as if waiting for rain. That same white suit, still without a single wrinkle or stain, looked absurd now, like it didn't belong in the same world as the death that sat in his trunk. Bako reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder, fingers trembling. Static crackled. "This is Unit 9. I need immediate backup at Checkpoint 4, urgent." Pastor Enoch's gaze shifted slowly toward the officer, and his voice broke the silence with a softness that made Bako's skin crawl. "You won't understand this now, officer. But in time, you'll see. This was necessary." Bako didn't reply. He kept his distance, hand resting near the holster on his belt now. He didn't know what the pastor was capable of, but something told him that the heads weren't the only horror hidden in that vehicle. He circled to the passenger door, opened it cautiously, and found more items: a blood-streaked cloth stuffed beneath the seat, a leather-bound book with strange symbols along the spine, and a rosary with burnt edges. There were prayers scribbled on napkins, not blessings, but chants, some written in languages Bako didn't recognize. The air felt heavier now, like something unseen had arrived to watch. He didn't dare ask more questions. Whatever this was, it had gone far beyond human explanation. And the man standing beside him wasn't just a suspect. He was a warning, one that had arrived dressed in white, riding comfortably between worlds. Backup wouldn't arrive for another 20 minutes. In those long minutes, Bako stood guard, one hand on his weapon, the other gripping the edge of the trunk, forcing himself to keep looking. The silence between them was unbearable, yet neither man spoke. Pastor Enoch leaned against the SUV, humming under his breath. A soft, almost childlike tune. It didn't match the scene. That was what unsettled Bako most. The calm. He stared at the heads again, trying to understand. They were not decayed or dried, but fresh, recently severed. There was still color in the skin, still emotion frozen into their features. Not the peace of death, but the terror of realization. And whoever had wrapped them in white had done so with care, neatly, intentionally, like a ritual, not a murder, but a ceremony. It was that precision that made Bako feel like vomiting. "Who are they?" he asked, voice low. The pastor tilted his head, as if listening to something far away. "They were chosen, not taken. Chosen," he replied, "for what must be balanced." Bako didn't bother asking what that meant. It would lead to madness. Instead, he waited for the hum of another patrol vehicle, for lights, for other eyes to see what he now wished he hadn't. But time moved slowly when horror held it by the throat. He paced, boots grinding against the gravel. In the corner of his eye, he kept watching Enoch, waiting for the man to break, to show even a flicker of guilt. But there was none. If anything, Pastor Enoch seemed relieved, as if the act of being caught had unburdened him, as if his work had been completed. The humming grew louder, the words now forming, half scripture, half something else, something older. Bako clenched his fists. He knew this was no ordinary arrest, no ordinary crime. What he had stepped into wasn't just blood and bodies. It was belief twisted into something wicked. And as the wind picked up slightly, lifting dust into the air and rustling the linen over the heads, Bako knew this would follow him. Long after the sirens came, long after the cameras flashed, he had seen something that most men weren't meant to see. Not in this lifetime. Maybe not in any. When the first patrol car finally pulled up, tires grinding to a halt, two officers jumped out, Sergeant Tunde and Corporal Chika. They approached quickly, their boots kicking up dust, but slowed the moment they saw Bako's face. No words were exchanged, just a silent nod toward the open trunk. They moved closer, peered in, and stopped cold. Chika stumbled back, muttering something under his breath. Tunde stood still, his jaw tightening as the sight registered fully. Two human heads, bound in white linen, gently swaying with the breeze like sleeping children. Pastor Enoch remained exactly where he had been, resting casually against his SUV, hands now folded across his chest. He greeted them with a calm nod, eyes almost warm. "You're right on time," he said, as if they were guests arriving for a meal. "It's all been prepared." Bako stepped forward, signaling for them to cuff him. Tunde hesitated. "Sir, do you have any weapons on you?" he asked out of habit, his voice stiff. The pastor extended his arms without a fight. "Only the word of God," he replied with a faint chuckle. His wrists were bound behind him, the metal cuffs clicking softly against his skin. And yet, he didn't look defeated. He looked content. As they led him to the patrol car, a slight smile returned to his face. One that didn't fit. Not for a man caught with death in his trunk. Not for someone facing the wrath of the law and likely the fury of an entire nation. But Pastor Enoch didn't look like someone who had lost. He looked like someone who had finished something. He turned slightly toward Bako before entering the car. "I prayed for you, you know. Before today, I saw your face." Bako didn't respond. His jaw clenched. The words slithered under his skin, unwelcome and unsettling. And just like that, the man who had stood on church stages, raised hands in televised crusades, and poured oil on countless heads, was now seated behind steel bars, silent and still, as if he had simply reached the end of a sermon. But in Bako's chest, an unease grew deeper. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was not the end, only the edge of something far more disturbing. The ride to the station was silent at first. Pastor Enoch sat in the back seat of the patrol car, hands cuffed, head gently tilted against the window as the landscape slid by. The distant trees blurred into streaks of green and brown, the horizon stretching endlessly in every direction. Officer Bako sat beside him, his radio crackling occasionally with chatter from other units, but he wasn't listening. His thoughts were tangled. A heaviness had settled in the car, thick and almost suffocating. Then, the pastor broke the silence. "You're wondering why I didn't run," he said softly. Bako didn't look at him. "I'm wondering what kind of man looks into the eyes of death and smiles." Enoch's response came after a pause. "A man who no longer sees death as an ending." Bako turned slightly now, his eyes locked on the pastor's face. "Then what do you see?" The pastor smiled faintly, eyes still distant. "A passage, like crossing a river. But most people are too afraid of water." It was the way he said it, not with madness, not with hysteria, but with gentle conviction, that disturbed Bako most. This wasn't a man unraveling under pressure. This was a man who believed every word he spoke. A man who had, in his own twisted way, found peace in the horror he carried. "Did you kill them?" Bako asked. Enoch turned to face him, their eyes meeting. "No," he said slowly. "I guided them." "To what?" "To their purpose. To the altar." Bako gripped the steering wheel tighter. They were boys. They were alive. Enoch's voice remained steady. "And now they are eternal." Bako's mouth dried. He had dealt with thieves, fraudsters, even killers before, but this was something else. Not just criminal, but spiritual corruption. Not someone trying to escape justice, but someone convinced he had already transcended it. The rest of the journey was silent again, but the weight in the vehicle only grew, not because of the handcuffs or the crime, but because Bako realized something chilling. You can jail a man's body, but not his belief. And in Pastor Enoch's eyes, he had already been freed. The car turned off the main road and began its slow descent toward the small station on the edge of town. The building was modest, weather-worn walls, faded signage, a peeling coat of blue paint. As they approached the gates, Bako glanced at the man beside him once more. Pastor Enoch hadn't moved. He sat with the same quiet composure, hands resting in his lap, cuffs glinting in the faint light. The hum of insects outside filled the space between them. Bako took a breath. "Tell me something. How long have you been doing this?" There was no anger in his voice, no heat, just the slow ache of someone trying to wrap his mind around something that didn't belong in the world he knew. Enoch tilted his head slightly, as if savoring the question. "Longer than you've been in uniform," he said with a tired smile. "Before the new churches, before the suits and the microphones." Bako turned fully to face him now, a chill crawling up his spine. "You're not talking about your ministry, are you?" "I'm talking about the work, the real work," Enoch replied. "Before crowds and donations, there were only shadows and silence. The covenant doesn't begin in the light." Something in his tone made Bako's blood run colder. He looked at the man, not at the smooth white suit or the polished shoes, but at his eyes. There was no remorse, no hesitation, only belief. Whatever Pastor Enoch had done, he had done it with purpose. That was what made him dangerous. Bako swallowed hard. "And you believe what? That you're saving souls?" Enoch turned away from him, gazing out at the dusty trees in the distance. "No," he whispered. "I'm feeding something older than souls." The gates creaked open, and the car rolled inside. Officers gathered near the door, whispering as they caught sight of who was inside, but Bako barely noticed them. His mind was stuck on one thing, the realization that the man they had arrested wasn't just a fraud hiding behind scripture. He was something far worse. A man so convinced of his own righteousness, he'd become blind to the horror of his hands. And in that moment, Bako knew they hadn't caught him. They'd only paused him. The transition from the heat outside to the chill of the station's holding room was sharp. The moment Pastor Enoch stepped through the doorway, the low murmur among the officers fell into stunned silence. Everyone knew who he was. His face had been printed on flyers, posters, and crusade banners. His voice had boomed from radio preachers across villages. To see him in handcuffs, escorted like a criminal, unsettled the room in a way no thief or murderer ever had. He sat calmly on the edge of the bench, fingers gently folded, humming once again. The tune was faint, repetitive, haunting. A security officer, young and clearly nervous, attempted to silence him, but Enoch didn't even blink. The song continued, as though it was not meant for those in the room but for something unseen. Something listening. Bako stepped aside, shaking his head. He didn't want to be near the man any longer than necessary. The longer he listened, the heavier the air became, like the walls were drawing in closer. He walked into the adjacent office where Sergeant Tunde waited, reviewing the preliminary report. Bako poured himself a glass of water but didn't drink it. "Did you read any of that book they found in his car?" he asked quietly. Tunde nodded. "Some pages are in English. Others, I don't even recognize the script. There are drawings, circles, candles, symbols that look like they were burned into the paper." "And the linen?" Bako asked. "It's ceremonial. That's the word the evidence tech used. Clean cuts, wrapped with precision, not something rushed." Bako rubbed the back of his neck. "He's not just sick. He's committed, like a priest to something no one wants to name." In the holding room, the humming stopped. Then, Enoch spoke, loud enough to be heard through the thin walls. "I told you, officer, this is bigger than one trunk. Bigger than me. The heads are only the beginning." Tunde froze. Bako didn't move. The entire station seemed to still, the sounds of footsteps and paperwork ceasing for one drawn-out moment. not from fear, but from something deeper, something that crawled under the skin and whispered that whatever had just been spoken was not just a warning, it was a promise. Word spread fast. By the end of the evening, whispers had rippled through the town, like ripples across still water. The miracle shepherd, Pastor Enoch, was behind bars. The same man who had laid hands on babies, blessed newlyweds, and raised offerings in thousands, was now the subject of hushed prayers and frightened glances. But what rattled the station more than the public shock was the quiet disbelief of those who had followed him for years. Officers who had attended his revivals, clerks who had once sought his blessings before exams. Even Sergeant Tunde admitted he had once brought his sick aunt to the church. The station walls had never felt so claustrophobic. And Bako, though outwardly composed, was restless. He paced the corridor like a man waiting for a storm that hadn't yet begun. He kept thinking about the linen, the hum, the book in the car. He kept seeing those two heads, preserved like trophies, faces frozen in the moment they crossed from faith into faith. Late that night, a senior officer arrived from the capital, a hard-eyed man in a dark overcoat. He reviewed the file without a word and requested the phone from Enoch's vehicle. The phone had been locked, but their tech managed to retrieve a few fragments, recorded audio clips, notes, and dozens of voice memos. One of them was only 20 seconds long. It began with the pastor chanting something in a foreign tongue, then silence, then a young voice, soft and trembling, saying, "Please, I want to go home." That voice broke something inside Bako. It wasn't just evidence. It was the echo of innocence crushed beneath ritual. And yet, when he looked into the cell where Enoch sat, he saw no guilt. The man sat with his back straight, as if waiting for an audience, as if he had done what was asked of him and now awaited a divine reply. Bako knew this wasn't over. There were names missing, victims never found, and worse, there were followers who would still protect him, still defend him. The horror wasn't only in what Enoch had done. It was in how many believed he had been right. The lab report came 3 days later. Officer Bako sat alone in the station office when the sealed envelope was handed to him. He didn't open it right away. He stared at it, as if already knowing that whatever was inside would only deepen the pit in his gut. When he finally unfolded the papers, the truth unraveled slowly, cruelly. The heads belonged to 2 missing youths, not strangers, not drifters. One was named Ebuka, a choir boy from a village just 30 minutes away. The other, Timmy, was the son of a woman who sold vegetables across from the pastor's church. Both had disappeared after attending a night vigil hosted by Enoch 2 weeks ago. Their families had reported them missing. Flyers had been posted, but no one had suspected the man who had prayed over their children. Bako sat in silence, his fingers tightening around the report. These were not random killings. They were deliberate, chosen, wrapped in ritual, masked in holiness. The station's chief wanted the news controlled, kept quiet to prevent panic, but Bako disagreed. The public had trusted this man with their children, their hearts, their hope. They deserved the truth. He stood, walked to the holding cell, and stared at Pastor Enoch through the iron bars. The pastor looked up, that same calm smile still on his lips. "You knew who they were," Bako said flatly. "You spoke to their mothers. You saw them sing in church." "Yes," Enoch said with a nod. "That's why they were worthy." Bako stepped back. There was nothing left to say, no justice that could balance that kind of belief. As he turned away, the pastor spoke again, voice steady and almost gentle. "There will be more." Bako stopped in his tracks. "More what?" he asked without turning. "More who?" Enoch replied. "The hunger doesn't sleep." Bako walked away, refusing to give him the last word. But deep inside, he knew this wasn't the end. There would always be those who wore white and walked among the faithful, men with soft voices and sharpened intentions. And sometimes, the devil didn't hide in darkness. Sometimes, he rode in daylight, behind the wheel of a clean white car. So, if you're still watching, remember, evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like a man with a smile, a Bible, and a reason. subscribe to the channel, like this video, and let us know in the comments. Would you have believed it if you saw him first?